Hello, everyone. For our pop culture case study, we chose to analyze management issues in an episode of The Orville, specifically Season 1, Episode 11, titled New Dimensions. I'm Isaac, and I'll start off by telling you a little bit about the show and the episode before turning it over to David and Dan to talk about some specific issues that we found and our recommendations on how to address them. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, think of The Orville as a modern homage to the classic Star Trek television show such as The Next Generation, but with an increased emphasis on the mundane aspects of living in the far future. It is set in the 25th century, and in an age where technology has advanced to the point where interstellar travel is possible. The USS Orville is the name of the exploratory spaceship where the show takes place. The Orville, the show that is, depicts an optimistic vision of humanity's future, one in which Earth is a member of the Planetary Union, a trans-species alliance of different worlds. The Planetary Union operates much like the Federation in Star Trek, where members peacefully cooperate in exploration and scientific research. Most members of the Union share common values on basic universal rights and have a degree of tolerance for differences between cultures and individuals. An important aspect of the show is that matter synthesis has completely changed how society operates. It is effectively a post-scarcity society where no one wants for basic needs such as food and shelter. Instead of money, the driving motivations for people tend to be things like their personal reputation or their internal desire to be the best at what they do. Let's quickly go over some of the characters that will be central to our discussion. Captain Ed Mercer, a highly gifted young officer that was predicted to rise to the Admiralty before a personal issue that derailed his career before landing his first captaincy of the USS Orville. When the engineering section lieutenant commander left for a new position, Mercer wanted to promote Yaphet to take over the section's leadership. XO Kelly Grayson, a science officer who was highly skilled in diplomacy before transferring to the Orville to become its first officer. Grayson was a good judge of character and able to determine a person's real worth before Mercer in many cases. Grayson discovered Lamar's academic record during the disciplinary hearing and advised for his promotion to lead the engineering section. Lieutenant John Lamar, hailing from a newly found colony world, where hard physical work is considered the pinnacle of contribution, and those that used their minds were isolated from much of the rest of the social aspects of the community. While at Union Fleet's Academy, Lamar's intelligence was challenged. He rose to the occasion and graduated with the highest mark in the Academy's history. After his graduation, Lamar would rise to an advanced level of helmsman would serve on the Orville before Mercer's appointment to the captaincy. Because of his anti-intellectual upbringing, and with the friendship of another member of the flight crew, he had developed a reputation and was considered a poor candidate for leadership. Lieutenant Yaphet. As a non-gelatinous being, Yaphet is one of the stranger members of the Orville crew, and like Lamar, had served on the Orville for some time before Mercer's captaincy. Serving in the engineering section under the outgoing lieutenant commander, Yaphet's experience was considered second to none, and his non-stable form allowed him to work in areas with less difficulty in comparison to non-gelatinous being. Yaphet was considered the natural successor to the engineering section. The 11th episode of the first season is titled New Dimensions and takes place near the 1 year mark of Mercer's captaincy. A major focus of the episode is on filling a vacancy in the position of the ship's chief engineer. Mercer and Grayson initially have differing opinions on who should be promoted into the role. Mercer believes that the best choice is to promote the most experienced engineer on the ship, while Grayson wants to consider a more unorthodox candidate who is currently serving in a different department. Mercer's favored choice is Yaphet, who has worked directly under the previous chief engineer and was considered next in line for promotion, both by himself and by other crew members. Grayson wants to consider Lamar, presently serving as the ship's navigator. The suggestion of Lamar is considered puzzling to most because he has not expressed an interest in the role, and he is more well known for immature behavior on the Orville. In fact, the episode started off with him getting formally reprimanded for an inappropriate prank. Grayson had discovered that Lamar had showed signs of engineering brilliance during his time at Union Point Academy, and she was puzzled why his role and record on the Orville was not making use of his apparent gifted ability. Shortly thereafter, the Orville encountered a spatial anomaly which disables the Orville's engines for a time, allowing for a task force to be formed to analyze the uncharted aberration. David, why don't you tell us some about the specific issues we identified in this episode?
Sure. At first glance, the primary issue seems to be that of motivation. Why was this one particular person not utilizing their full ability, and how could he be encouraged to fulfill his full potential? However, as Mercer and Grayson attempted to motivate Lamar, other more prominent issues arose. Structural issues and leadership management readily became apparent. There was a very obvious lack of reinforcement in leadership training, and this, along with the fact that there was no set protocol for handling promotions, is what led to the very messy power struggle for the engineering department position. As mentioned above, crew motivation was also a secondary issue. In this setting, a desire to be the best is what primarily motivates people. However, it appears that little thought has been put into what the best means to an individual. In Lamar's case, he had settled for living a nondescript life. This causes friction between him and his leaders as they were approaching motivation from opposing viewpoints. Because it served as the catalyst for exposing the other issues, let's start with the issue of Lamar's intellectual underutilization and the strategies that the other characters pursued to try and address it. Mercer and Grayson largely approached the issue on two fronts. One, trying to better understand why Lamar is hesitant to demonstrate his intelligence and take on more challenging roles. And two, pushing Lamar into a situation where he will have the opportunity to show leadership skills and test his abilities. For the first strategy of trying to better understand Lamar, the characters simply have an ongoing dialogue with him to get to know him better. He resists these attempts at first, simply expressing that he is just content with keeping his life simple. Eventually, however, they learn that his reasons for suppressing his intelligence go back well before he joined the crew of the Orville. He grew up in an environment where anti-intellectualism was rampant, and the standing out would result in social isolation. This revelation was important for the leadership of the crew to understand. As Nigel Nicholson noted in the 2003 article, How to Motivate Your Problem People, the first step in addressing problematic performance is for a manager to understand what drives that employee, what is blocking them, and how things might change if the things that are blocking them can be removed. If someone truly does not want to change, it cannot be imposed from the outside. To quote, change comes from within, or not at all. The second strategy pursued by the characters to test Lamar was accomplished by assigning him a temporary leadership role for a specific project with a fixed duration. The crew needed to investigate an unusual spatial anomaly the ship had encountered, and Lamar was put in charge of the task force assigned to carry out that effort. This exercise would be an instructive test of his leadership abilities, because he would have command over the staff of the department he would be leading if chosen for the chief engineer position. It will provide an opportunity to observe how he interacted with the crew and how they responded to his leadership. Mutual trust, respect for knowledge, equal relationships, and transparency are highly valued amongst employees, according to Michael Lee and Robin Rasch's 2016 study, Understanding Employee Motivation and Organizational Performance, Arguments for a Set Theoretic Approach. Putting Lamar into this position would allow his leaders to gauge how his fellow crew members felt about him. Putting Lamar in charge of the task force also exposed some other problems. Examining these from a human resources frame, it was quickly apparent that Lamar did not have adequate leadership training. His knowledge of engineering did not extend to how to lead a team of engineers, and it was clear that he had not received instruction in this area. A colleague gave him some impromptu advice on an ice-breaking activity, but it was ineffective, poorly executed, and ended up just being awkward. As David Sluss noted in the Harvard Business Review article, stepping into a leadership role, be ready to tell your story. Someone stepping into a leadership role should have a pitch and a plan from the beginning. People will inherently make evaluations of a new leader from the first conversation, and those first impressions can have a lasting effect. Lamar's upbringing made him nervous in positions where his intelligence is on display. So when attempting to utilize an icebreaker, Lamar's nerves made what should have been a fun moment into an intense one. This moment leads to Lamar coming across as a harsh leader that will not tolerate people expressing their views and concerns, possibly undermining the existing team cohesion. Additionally, there was a lack of psychological safety within the rest of the engineering team, demonstrating that Lamar was not the only one who could have benefited from leadership training. At one point during the episode, Yaphet suggested a course of action that was approved by Lamar and carried out by the entire team. When they encountered an unforeseen setback, multiple members of the team were quick to cast blame specifically on Yaphet, instead of taking collective responsibility. As discussed in the Google Rework Guide that we read in Week 2, psychological safety is arguably the most important dynamic of an effective team. Without it, people will not feel safe to take necessary risks or offer up new ideas. The efforts by the ship's leadership to push and test Lamar had some unintended consequences. This shined a light on the primary issue, the unorthodox methods they used for managing and developing talent, particularly in how they conducted the process for filling the vacant chief engineer position. It should be noted that while the Orville is not a military ship, life on board any ship is highly structured along similar lines to ensure the safety of everyone on board regardless of the setting or era. This is reflected via military nomenclature rank, and why respect for chain of command is upheld, if not quite as strictly as an actual military. One thing the leadership failed to do was look at the situation from the political frame as described by Bowman and Deal in 2017. Yaphet was surprised to learn that he was not put in charge of the task force, and he recognized that putting Lamar in charge was a sign that Lamar was strongly being considered for the chief engineer position, that Yaphet felt he had earned. In addition to triggering a power struggle within the crew, the decision had opened up leadership to accusations of favoritism and discrimination. The most significant issue was structural. The process followed for selecting someone to promote into the chief engineering position came across as very informal and made it easy for bad feelings to occur between the crew, or for blame to be cast if things later didn't go well. Promoting an employee with little field experience over one actively working in engineering might be defensible in specific circumstances, but it's important that a defined process be followed to evaluate all the candidates fairly. In this case, however, the untested employee was pushed largely based on what appeared to be a gut feeling, and given a change to demonstrate their ability in the way that the other candidate was not. This made it look like there was a predetermined favorite before the process started. Lamar was put in charge of a project as a test to whether he could do the job, but Yaphet was not afforded an equivalent opportunity. This could be because he had a more experienced track record and was more of a known quantity in engineering, but opened up leadership to accusations of favoritism and discrimination. No reasons were ever discussed as to why Yaphet might not be suitable for the job. Because this was a TV show, a series of well-timed events and forgiving characters meant that all was smoothed over in the end. But it would be easy to also envision a scenario where tension and bad blood between the crew lingered, and where things got messy the next time a prominent position on the ship became open. So, how could these issues be addressed? Dan, would you like to outline some improvement strategies?
Yes, David, I'd be happy to. Some of the actions taken were steps in the right direction, but they need to be adjusted to address some of their flaws. For example, engaging the crew members to find out what might be inhibiting their motivation is a good idea, but it should be something done as a part of a regular performance review process, not just when an open position needs to be filled. Our first recommendation is to increase the frequency of this communication. As Bullman and Deal noted in their human resources frame, leaders in an organization need to, quote, make sure employees have the skills, support, and resources to do their jobs. A major component of this support is making sure that employees receive regular feedback. The Dennis Wilson article that we read in Week 10, Why Year-End Reviews Are a Big Fat Waste of Time, emphasizes this by reminding us that relying only on sporadic and dispersed moments, such as year-end reviews, tends to have negative returns for employees. In this case, rather than a year-end review, it was a disciplinary hearing triggered by an ill-advised prank. Prior to this incident, Lamar's record was not private or hidden from leaders such as Mercer and Grayson. The fact that they only discovered Lamar's untapped ability when they did shows that there are probably other missed opportunities to learn about their crew's strengths and weaknesses. Also, communication is not a one-way street. It's important not just for supervisors to provide feedback to those who report to them, but for people at all levels of an organization to communicate to their leaders their own goals and aspirations. Another action that had some merit but needs adjustment was the idea of using a special project or task to test or stretch someone's ability. This concept fits in well with our Cotter reading from week 4, What Leaders Really Do. Instead of waiting for leaders to come along, organizations instead, quote, actively seek out people with leadership potential and expose them to career experiences designed to develop that potential, end quote. One benefit of this approach was that it allowed a rapid prototyping/stress test of someone's leadership skills without all the dangers of giving them permanent responsibility in that role. It should be avoided, however, in the context of testing someone for a specific job opening if other leading candidates cannot be afforded the same opportunities. We recommend standardizing and formalizing some of the evaluation processes when considering crew members for promotion. While the Orville situation required immediate leadership due to outside pressures being applied, a formalized process of selection would have limited tensions between Yaphet and Lamar during the task force's existence. All candidates for position should be given similar opportunities to assess their strengths and weaknesses. As Sir Andrew Leakerman noted in the Elements of Good Judgment article that we read in week 7, sometimes leadership requires a decision to be made without clear evidence of which path is obvious. Having a defined process, however, should at least reduce the possibility that a candidate would feel that the process was unfair. Ideally, if Yaphet approached Mercer after not getting the job to ask for feedback on what would have made him a stronger candidate, Mercer should be able to suggest a few specific things. This is especially important since all the candidates were internal and would need to continue working together no matter who is chosen. Our third major recommendation would be to establish a mentoring program. When Lamar needed advice for taking on a leadership role, he first sought it out from one of his close friends, but that person lacked those experiences and skills and ended up giving ineffective advice. Mentoring includes more than just career advice. It also means checking in on the mentee's non-work life. As Rick Woolworth noted in the Harvard Business Review article titled, "Great Mentors Focus on the Whole Person, Not Just Their Career," most mentoring is not taught in structured slots, but through actions in the moment. Lamar's relationship with Mercer and Grayson is largely professional with only a small social aspect. Even if the captain and first officer were not suitable as mentors, there are many others in their larger organization who could be. The Orville is not the only ship in the Union fleet, and they have the technology to communicate across vast distances. Officers and engineers serving on different ships could be valuable mentors without the risk of political conflicts that might arise from a mentor in a direct reporting relationship. The field of starship and engineering might also have professional organizations that can connect mentors and mentees, just as there are in the library world. For example, the Society of American Archivists has a formal 6-month mentoring program where mentors and mentees fill out an application and are paired up on a variety of criteria, including interests, location, and background. There's no reason why a similar program wouldn't work for Lamar's engineering field. Given the limited number of people on the ship serving in specialized roles, a mentor from outside the immediate organization could be a valuable resource to help Lamar broaden his perspective. Later in the episode, Captain Mercer did begin to connect with Lieutenant Lamar on a personal level with promising results. During a private moment, Mercer asked Lamar about his motivations in a way that conveyed that he knew what was going to be said was private and personal, and that he would respect an honest answer. Lamar opened up to Mercer about his upbringing, and Mercer was able to give some advice that Lamar seemed to take to heart. Mercer asking questions to encourage Lamar to express his aspirations and fears also aligns with Woolworth's recommended mentoring practice of asking great questions and encouraging mentees to share their stories. So to recap, while at a glance the day-to-day management issues aboard a 25th century starship would seem difficult to compare with what we face on Earth here in the present day, many of the fundamental elements are actually not all that different. Even the absence of financial motivations has less of an impact than one would think. The management challenge is somewhat similar to a situation an organization might face when compensation is already sufficient to meet basic needs. Beyond a certain point, Additional money ceases to be a motivating factor. A lack of it can contribute to dissatisfaction, but adding more will not drive someone to achieve their full potential. In this episode, the immediate issue was a lack of motivation for a particular crew member to make the most of their abilities, but the crew's attempts to address this issue exposed other, more fundamental ones in how certain aspects of the organization were managed. These included inadequate preparation for leadership roles, along with informal and subjective processes for evaluating performance. Some ways that these issues could be addressed included providing more regular feedback, more formally defining how candidates are evaluated for promotion, and either establishing or making better use of mentoring programs. In some instances, it is a matter of adjusting existing approaches the crew is already trying to take, rather than spearheading completely new initiatives. With that said, what do all of you think? We'd love to hear some of your ideas on how you would address some of these issues. For instance, do you think leadership of a short-term project team is a sufficient test for a long-term department leadership position? What are some possible shortfalls of that approach? Or, how can organizations encourage unmotivated employees to pursue development opportunities and stretch their comfort zones? And finally, how would you address the potential friction if you had to choose between two different employees who applied for the same internal promotion in your organization? If you're interested in reviewing the materials cited during this presentation, here are the class readings and other articles that we used.
Here are our images used for the presentation. The Orville was produced by Fuzzy Door Productions and 20th Television for Fox for its first 2 seasons. Some additional images were taken from the Steam page of the Orville Interactive Fan Experience and its community page.